A court in New South Wales lifted the publication ban on Spycatcher, the memoirs of former MI5 officer Peter Wright. The book had been the subject of repeated efforts by the British government to prevent its publication on the grounds of national security. Wright maintained he had revealed nothing that would compromise security, and the book had already been published in some territories like the USA, but even so the UK government vowed to appeal the Australian court's verdict. Televangelist Pat Robertson announced that he would seek the nomination of the Republican Party in the upcoming 1988 presidential election. In order to do so, he handed the reins of his TV network, the Christian Broadcasting Network, to his son Tim, and campaigned on a conservative platform aiming to continue the policies of outgoing President Reagan. Elsewhere, New York-based real estate mogul Donald Trump had also taken out full-page adverts in major newspapers attacking government policy and was rumoured to be considering a run himself. And in the world of Formula One, Frank Williams had confirmed the rumours that Riccardo Patrese would be taking over Nelson Piquet's car for 1988. With all due respect to the veteran Italian, it seemed clear to most pundits that Frank wished to avoid a repeat of the who's number one driver wrangles of the last couple of years. The Coloni team had, as planned, rejoined the field at Jerez, putting the entry back up to 28, but otherwise everything was as it had been in Estoril a week earlier. The circuit in the far south of Spain hosted its first race last year, seeing a thrilling finale with Mansell and Senna crossing the line practically together in a photo finish. That hadn't made much difference to the still rather underwhelming crowd size, but the teams were looking forward to the race on this technical circuit with great facilities. Meanwhile, Spanish clothing manufacturer Lois, sponsor of the Minardi team, organised a multi-sport tournament for a bit of fun for the drivers, which was won by Eddie Cheever. Qualifying saw the Ferraris continue their resurgence, duelling with the Williams drivers at the top of the lap charts. Mansell topped them in his passive car until late on Saturday, when Piquet suddenly went much faster, indicating that he'd been sandbagging so far. Mansell, still out on the track, came in for new tyres to have another go, only to be hit with a random weight check. He hopped out and sprinted down the pit to get in the active car and set off, a breach of regulations that cost him $30,000 and all his Saturday times disallowed. It didn't matter in the end, he'd set his fastest time on Friday. So it was Piquet on pole, with Mansell second for his 14th consecutive front row start. Behind them were the Ferraris, having their best qualifying in a while, with Senna 5th, Fabi 6th, Prost 7th, that misfire was back, and Boutsen 8th. The Brabhams were on row 5 with a rear-facing camera on De Cesaris' car, ahead of an unhappy Johansson who was also misfiring. Arnoux had a much better time of it in the Ligier, with the Tyrrells and Alliot well up in the non-turbo cars, and the Minardis by contrast slipping back towards the rear of the grid. AGS had done some work with Roberto Moreno at the wheel between races, and were rewarded with 25th slot, and Nicola Larini squeaked his Coloni onto the grid in 26th place, leaving both Azella drivers to watch from the sidelines on Sunday, Farini never really having got to grips with the circuit and some 12 seconds off the pace. Sunday dawned grey and drizzly, and there was some light rain during the morning, but by the time of the race the track was still dry, although the clouds were still threatening. The lights went green and everybody got away cleanly, with Senna getting a great start to go ahead of both Ferraris into turn 1, while Prost lost out to Boutsen and Patrese. At the back, Larini had a great start, getting ahead of 2 cars into the first corner and another 2 in turn 2. So, Piquet in the active Williams led Mansell in the passive car, a decision made by Patrick Head, who wanted a race-long comparison between the two, but not for long, as Mansell nipped through at the end of the lap and held the place despite Piquet's efforts to find a way past on the straight, and Senna was right behind and waiting for an opening. The two Williamses quickly began to pull away from the Lotus, which had the Ferraris and Benettons behind him. Ayrton was running a low downforce setup, which, combined with the active suspension, he hoped would allow him to go through the race non-stop, which is what had won him it last year. For now, though, it didn't seem to be working, as the two Williamses disappeared into the distance to the tune of a second and a half a lap, and Senna seemed to be holding up Berger & Co., but it was a long race and anything could yet happen. Local boy Campos, under great pressure from the Spanish media, had a spin on lap 6 but managed to keep it going and continue on his way. Meanwhile, Patrese, off camera, was dropping back 12th place by lap 8. On that lap, Larini and Coloni's debut came to an end with suspension problems, but they would be happy to have got into the race and will have gained some valuable experience for next year. Fabre's AGS didn't last much longer, having a rare technical failure, the clutch, on lap 10, just as he was being lapped by Senna and co, who now had Prost on the tail of their little train. Alboreto got in front of Berger on lap 13 as Fabi failed to mirror the move, and was soon up having a go at Senna himself, but without much more joy than Berger had had before him. As they all lapped Campos, Berger got a bit out of shape and nearly lost his place to Boutsen, but opportunities to pass are few and far between on this tight circuit, and it remained as you were as Patrese came in for some consultations. Johansson had now moved up ahead of De Cesaris, so it was Williams, Lotus, Ferrari, Benetton, McLaren. Only Nakajima toiling away in 14th in the other Lotus spoiled the perfect Noah's Ark 2x2 formation. And much as everyone was giving it their best, there just isn't really anywhere to pass at Jerez, or even anywhere for a driver to have a breather, so the race remained fairly static as the teams and drivers looked towards the halfway point and some tyre stops to see what might change. Ghinsani, presumably on his way from Ligier after the breakdown of the Alfa Romeo deal, was the next casualty on 24 laps with an ignition failure, and 2 laps later De Cesaris' gearbox gave up the ghost, but it had been a fairly low attrition rate so far, as Prost made an early, if slow, pit stop to give himself a clear run. Fabi was next in on lap 29 for a very long stop, as Prost vindicated his choice to stop with the fastest lap. On the half-distance lap, Alboreto was still pressuring Senna for third place, with both Benettons having stopped, and Mansell was nearly 20 seconds ahead of Piquet, who appeared to be cruising rather than trying to chase his teammate as he lapped Palmer and Alio, scrapping over the lead of the 3.5 litre category in the midfield. Alboreto and Berger were still chasing Senna, all three trying to run non-stop, as Prost approached the trio, having out-strategied the Benettons to get ahead of them after the pit stops. Mansell then made his stop on lap 43. Not a great stop, but he had plenty of time in hand over Piquet and rejoined just ahead of the Brazilian. Mansell on new tyres had to keep Piquet behind him until they warmed up, which was easier here than at many places. The two Ferraris were still going at each other hammer and tongs, and at Senna too, and now Prost was right up behind Berger and hoping to, once again, pressure him into making a mistake. At the end of lap 44, Berger took Alboreto on the last corner, and Prost took the opportunity to pass them both in a masterly move. Next time round it was Piquet's turn for the pits, but he hadn't put his foot on the brake well enough, and the rear tyremen couldn't attach the wheels to the spinning hubs for precious seconds. After nearly 20 seconds stationary, he sped off, emerging from the pits just in time to nearly collect a Ferrari in the rear, and nearly sawing Berger's nose off defending his place. So it was Senna second now, with Prost third and Piquet fourth, and the Lotus driver going the distance on one set of tyres. The rest were going to have to find a way past if they wanted to move up. They were certainly giving it a good go, with 3 of the 4 title candidates now running nose to tail. Boutsen was also moving up, getting ahead of Alboreto into 6th, then taking 5th when Berger pitted on lap 48 for new tyres to see if that would make a difference, just as Piquet got his car ahead of Prost, only to get his wheels on the marbles and spin out, losing places as he rejoined 6th. So now, Senna on worn tyres was trying to keep Prost behind him, with Alboreto and Boutsen not far behind, as they lapped Chiva. Piquet was still 6th ahead of Berger, with Johansson 8th, and then Palmer and Alio still duking it out for the Atmo lead in 9th and 10th. As Prost continued to try to find a way past Senna, Boutsen succeeded in finding a way past Alboreto, who now had Piquet in his mirrors as Chiva moved smartly out of the way. The Ferrari driver peeled into the pits for tyres next time around, which promoted Piquet once more. It was another good Ferrari stop, the fastest of the race so far, and Michele would hope to take advantage of his fresh rubber to catch quickly back up to the group led by Senna, who were still running right together with 19 laps to go. Prost couldn't entirely concentrate on passing Senna because a lively Boutsen looked like he was going to nip past at any moment, and Piquet was also right there if anyone had a problem or made a mistake. Streff spun into the weeds as they came past and approached Nakajima to lap him, and Berger added himself to the back of the pack. If Senna was hoping his Japanese teammate would hold the others up, he was disappointed, as Satoru's manners were impeccable. Up front, Nigel Mansell was 27 seconds clear of Senna and just hoping his car held out after having retired from the lead 3 times so far this year. The cameras followed him for a few minutes, and when they returned to the battle for second, both Boutsen and Piquet had passed Prost, and Berger soon followed them through into 5th. The Palmer-Alio battle was resolved in Philippe's favour when Jonathan was taken off by Arnoux Ligier while lapping it. René then retired a lap later in the pits with a broken engine, and still that 5-car train kept going. Boutsen was all over the back of the Lotus now, while Prost seemed to be dropping back with presumably a reprise of that misfire, with Johansson now right behind him and ahead of Alboreto, whose Ferrari was also beginning to sound a little rough. Piquet finally bullied his way past Boutsen into third, and now it was his turn to stare at Senna's gearbox as the laps ticked down. Berger's own Ferrari motor started emitting smoke and he dropped out of the train, as Piquet had a look at Senna, who chopped across in front of him, leaving Piquet to fishtail under braking and giving Boutsen a chance. It was certainly exciting stuff. A pity, really, there were only about 3 men and a dog at the track to see it. If Piquet could take second place, he would have one hand on the championship trophy, even assuming Mansell won, so he was desperately trying to find a way past his Brazilian rival, possibly the only man he got on with less well than Mansell. Finally, on lap 63, Piquet got the inside line at turn 1 and stuck it out to take the place, with Boutsen and Prost following through as Senna's tyres lost grip under braking. Even Cheever, still stuck in the middle of the group, nearly unlapped himself as the Lotus recovered. Berger's Ferrari had hung on gamely for 3 laps with smoke pouring from it, but it finally failed as Piquet, Boutsen and Prost began to leave Senna behind, and Nelson put the hammer down to try to stay ahead of the others, even if he had no real chance of catching Mansell at this stage. There were by now just 5 laps left, and all Piquet needed to do was follow Mansell home to make it very hard for anyone else to win the title. Instead, he lost concentration, bounced across the grass, and rejoined just as Boutsen went flying past, only to end up backwards in a gravel trap himself, having run wide to avoid the rejoining Williams. A very lucky Piquet rejoined ahead of Prost, who was held up behind Alio and unable to capitalise. So with just 4 laps to go, it was Mansell, Piquet, Prost, Alboreto, Johansson and Senna in the points-paying places. Prost soon got passed into second, Piquet lighting up his tyres as he locked up, and Nelson came in at the end of the lap for new boots. And when Alboreto's Ferrari came out in sympathy with Berger's, Johansson went by into third place. And that finally was how they finished. Mansell took his 5th win of the year with Prost and a slightly surprised but delighted Johansson third. Piquet trailed in 4th ahead of a fading Senna, with Philippe Alliot picking up the last point and the win in the atmospheric category, followed home by Streff in 7th. Cheever's car ran out of fuel in the closing stages, but he was classified 8th, with Capelli 3rd in the junior category and 12th overall, ahead of a gamely plugging away Patrese and Adrian Campos, 4 laps down, but probably glad to finish his home race. In a later interview, Martin Brundle said that his 11th place in the Zakspeed was, quote, "the time I got out of the car thinking no human could have done any better." So Piquet still led the standings on 70 points, with Mansell moving up to second and now 18 points behind, and moreover, Piquet had now scored 11 times and would have to start discarding results. Prost, meanwhile, was officially out of the running. While McLaren could mathematically still nick the Constructors' title, they needed 3 1-2 finishes in the last 3 races, with Williams scoring no more than 4 points. There was now a 3-week gap for the teams to pack up their kit and prepare for an exhausting final 3 rounds, beginning with the return to the dust, altitude and bumps of Mexico City.